So welcome to our theories class. Our first lecture is really about why we take this class, a little introduction to the concept of uh, theories and therapy, and also um, a discussion on ethics. Uh, Now, we will most likely discuss ethics in a number of classes. Um, so it may be repetitive, but it's pretty important. Um, so I'm sorry for the repetitiveness of the ethical part, but um, we stress it in almost every class. So let's talk about theories. So um, when we talk about theories, and which of course we use in therapy, all of our therapy should be rooted in some theory. Uh, and that is for the protection of the client and to best meet the needs of the client. Now, most people, when we say, well, what's our primary objective? People say, well, it's to help clients, but it's the same as um, the Hippocratic Oath uh, in the medical field, because, you know, uh, we do affect people's lives. And so the primary objective is to cause no harm to the client. That is our first objective, even beyond helping them, cause no harm. So why do we need an understanding of major theories? Well, there's more to it than one might think. So think about it this way. The way I outline this course, um, yes, theories are categorized. So for instance, there are cognitive theories, existential theories, things like that. But the way I uh, outline this course, and most people do, is chronologically. So, we begin when uh, psychological theory really begins. So, as we learn about theories, it moves us through the history of our profession in a chronological fashion. We're learning both about the history as we learn about theoretical perspectives, and we gain a foundation in theory. Um, the more we learn about theories, the better we are able to meet the needs of our clients and help the clients. I remember, when I was starting out, I had two fears. Of course, I think everybody has these same fears. Um, my first fear was I did not want to harm a client in any way, even if by missing something or not doing something that I should. I didn't want to cause them any harm or neglect. So that was my first fear. My second fear was that I was in sessions that were almost an hour long, 50 minutes, and I was worried about running out of things to say. What if the client doesn't talk? And that happened a number of times, of course. So the one thing that I did that helped to alleviate those fears is uh, I really immersed myself in theory. I I thought, well, the better I know my theories, uh, the more I can rely on that knowledge to help my clients. I'll always have some response that is appropriate, and uh, and I'll feel more secure about helping clients. So um, I really focused on learning these theories when I was in my master's degree just like you, um, but it was because of those fears and the desire to help people. The next reason is uh, a little more logistical. So we want you to be prepared for the comps, for certification if you're a school counselor, or want to become a nationally certified counselor, NCC. We want you to be prepared for the National Counseling Exam, which is required for licensure. So, Praxis, the comps, and the NCE. Um, you know, we want you to be prepared for that. And we also want you to find a personal theory of counseling that fits your philosophy of life and the profession. It should be an extension of your own personality, and you should feel comfortable with it. My personal theory of counseling is existential theory, and I'll be talking a lot more about that as we cover existential theory. You can review on your own the personal characteristics of effective counselors, discuss that in your discussion posts, and you'll also be writing about that in your final paper. Let's see. I think one of the most important things for counselors is for counselors to know their own issues. If we don't understand our own issues, we get trapped in countertransference, where we project our emotions that are related to somebody else in our life onto our clients. And that's not appropriate. And we'll talk more about that when we cover Freud. But the main point of this, ethically, is that we need to be aware of our own issues. And we need to get help for those, just like we help our clients. If you buy into being a therapist, but you don't buy into being a client, you need to kind of re-examine that. I think it's good for every therapist to also be in therapy at some point. It helps you to understand what it's like to be a client, to tell somebody your concerns, to disclose to a stranger. So, it may, understanding our own issues may result in seeking counseling yourselves. And we do have free counseling at our counseling center, uh, right at CalU. So let's talk a little bit about ethical choices and values. So ethics does usually have a right or wrong answer, whereas values do not. The answer to ethical choices may change as laws change, but let's talk about both ethics and values. So let's start with ethics. Um, there, uh, there is a progression, a model for making ethical choices, the ethical decision making process. So, and you should remember these. Number one, what do we do if we have an ethical choice to make? Well, first thing we do is look at legal guidelines. And first, of course, we look at national laws, federal laws. Then, if there's no federal law, we look at state laws. And if there's no state laws, we look at court precedents, so court rulings, first at the federal level and then at the state level. So laws, federal, state, court precedents, and you should remember the word court precedent, federal and state. Well, you might say, well, how would I research that? Well, that's what our organizations are for. We become members in ACA, the American Counseling Association, and we can call them with questions, with ethical questions, and they have lawyers that can help you. So, and the reason these things can change is that with every court decision that moves to a higher level, or with every new law, the legal guideline changes, and hence the ethical decision, the answer to that changes as well. So the next thing, well, let's say that doesn't answer your question. Well, we have ethical guidelines. So number 2 is ethical guidelines from professional organizations. And I would first look at the ACA, the American Counseling Association. Then I would look at the ASCA, if you're a school counselor, the American School Counseling Association. You can also look at the APA, the American Psychological Association, or the NBCC, the National Board for Certified Counselors. So those are the 4 primary organizations to look for ethical guidelines. Each organization has a detailed code of ethics. Number 3 is ongoing supervision, including peer supervision. You should never be without supervision. You might think when you're in practicum or clinical field, oh, supervision is such a hassle. But as long as I am counseling, I will be in supervision. Now, later on, when you have a license, you can do peer supervision with another person that is licensed and supervise one another for free. Or you can contract with somebody, which I've done as well. But you should always be in supervision. And most insurance companies for liability insurance also include a requirement that you are in supervision. And the last thing, number 4, is training and continuous learning. You should always be getting CEUs, continuing education units. You're required to do that for licensure and for other certifications. And you need to learn about what's new in the field. Keep abreast of what's going on in the field of counseling and possibly contribute to that field of knowledge as well. So, legal guidelines are found in all of those areas, and that is the first place to look. So the next thing we should examine is what appropriate practice should include. Should include an understanding of confidentiality, which is not sharing information. And in other courses, you're going to talk about note keeping and security and all of those things that maintain confidentiality and keeping records safe. The next thing is limits of confidentiality, and you'll have to memorize these in your skills class. But limits of confidentiality include if there's a possibility of harm to the client, self, or others, including abuse, suicidal ideation, a need for hospitalization. Some books, I think Corey might now, divide that into 2 different things. Abuse is a separate category as well, but it's included in there. The second thing, if a client is a minor, the parents or guardian may request the records. Don't forget to include guardian. Um, if a court subpoenas the records, learn how to spell the word subpoena. So if a court requests the records, you must release what they request. And number 4, you're going to have to communicate about cases with your supervisor, especially in practicum and field, but you should always get good supervision or be on a treatment team. Confidentiality in this class, you don't have to include that in a limit, but it's important to maintain confidentiality in this class as well. So let's talk about qualifications, limitations, referrals. It's important not to abandon a client. So if you feel as though you cannot see a client, it's important that you help them to find another therapist. You can't just drop a client. It's important not to give advice. If you give advice and it doesn't work, or it ends in a negative situation, then you will be to blame because it was your advice. It's better to facilitate awareness so that the client can come up with their own decisions about their life. It's important to understand what you are qualified to do and what you are not. If you need more training, if you need more supervision, it's important to voice that. If you don't feel, so for instance, when I was in my master's degree, my supervisor wanted to give me a client that had an eating disorder. Well, I did not feel qualified to treat that at that point in my career, and she was a good supervisor. She gave me some choices. First choice was to refer. The second choice was she would give me articles to read and videos to watch, and she would give me extra training and supervision. And that's what I chose to do. And I think the only condition was that if the eating disorder became life-threatening, then we would both make sure that that person got the help that they needed. But it became a learning experience under the right supervision and training. But it's important to voice what you do not feel qualified to do so that you can get extra supervision and training or refer to a more qualified individual. So that goes hand in hand with your limitations. Understand your limitations and work on those limitations. So values, that's different than ethics. Values have more to do with personal belief systems, and there is usually no right or wrong answer. So what I can tell you about values is examine your values. Are your values ethical? The most important thing about values is do not impose your values onto a client. That's the most important thing. Most people think that imposing your values on a client is telling them what to do. In reality, most times we impose values by only giving clients part of the information. So, for instance, if a client has a dilemma and we give that client brochures that match our values, but we do not give them brochures that do not match our values, that is imposing our values upon the client by not giving them the full spectrum of choices. We must give the client all of the possibilities, not just the ones we like or believe in. Think about cases or situations that you might not feel comfortable with. Ask yourself, well, what's going on that you don't feel comfortable? One time I was given I had worked a lot with children who had been abused, and a supervisor referred a pedophile to me as a client. I did not want to take that client because I was a child advocate. And my supervisor gave me the same choices, and I saw that client, and of course I found out that they had been abused as a child. That does not excuse their actions by any means. But I also learned a lot more about that diagnosis as well. So I think that covers the basics. You will have other classes that go into much greater detail with ethics. But I think it's important to give the basics of these ethics in a theories class and why we study theories. And we will begin with our first theory next week. Thank you. I'll be looking forward to reading your posts.